Okay, now welcome to a new day. As you can see, the video is going to be a lot longer than I thought it was, and I think that's okay. But part two is working with subcontractors. I know it's a topic that many of you are seeking information about, and you're going through the process of reaching out to subs and you're struggling. So maybe some of these will help. Hopefully some of them will. So lesson number 23. Subcontractors are like herding cats is something that I like to say. And just picture trying to get cats to all run together in a straight line. You know, it's like working with toddlers in some instances. And that's just the truth. So the goal is to set the expectation right where it should be. And if you know that going in, you're going to keep them, no pun intended, but on a much shorter leash. And some of these additional lessons are going to be components of this main one. So we'll just kind of keep rolling with it. Lesson number 24, the sub will lose the bid for you. So the subcontractor will lose the bid for you. Why? Primarily, it's overpricing. Usually, subcontractors, businesses that do work, provide a service in the commercial space, they hear government contracting and they think deep pockets because they think government, and then they will double or triple their margins just because of that. If you do not do an adequate job of educating your prospective teaming partner, they will lose the bid for you more times than not because they're being super greedy. They need to be informed that they should be quoting this job as if they were going up against, their stark competition in the commercial space. Because yes, they do have competitors in the commercial space, but guess what? Other people, other prime contractors like yourself, could be calling around getting prices, getting quotes, and could be calling their competition too, right? They could be a prospective sub, So very literally, their competition could be bidding against them. Do they have the luxury of doing double or triple margins? Heck no. So there's multiple reasons. Because additionally, the government doesn't have deep pockets. The government's going to be looking to pay a fair market price for whatever the service is because they've already done their research. You guys, you don't know this, but the government has already called around and done exactly what you're doing to get prices and quotes as well. And maybe some of you have discovered that when you call, you're like, oh yeah, the government's already reached out to me. When I was, back 2015-ish, when I really started getting into calling a lot of subs, some of them would say, oh yeah, the government already contacted me. And I'm like, what? Why would they do that? And I would be thinking they're sole sourcing it to the company. And I'm like, well, why are they even putting it as a solicitation on, at the time it was FBO, Fed Biz Ops, but the equivalent of sam.gov. Why are they even soliciting it? And then I concluded okay, well, they're just doing a paper trail. In some instances, that probably is true, but they will have to eventually put a J&A out, a notification to sole source to a company, so that becomes public knowledge on, SAM, FBO. But really, I had learned what was being done was the government had already called around and got prices. Doesn't mean they're going with them because, right, those subs are not necessarily even set up with a cage code, which they need to be in order for the government to, operate into some sort of direct agreement with them. So no, the government was identifying their own estimate, their own independent government cost estimate, their IGCE, the little number they have on the napkin. And then to that, they will add a reasonable, profit, markup, and other, overhead or G&A expenses, depending on the needs of the contract of you, the prime, to get to what they feel like a reasonable markup is based on reasonably accepted percentages and no different than the way things work in the commercial world. Okay, so a bit into depth on this one, but these are the reasons why if the sub isn't, they don't need to know everything I just said. You do, right? But you need to let them know that they're going up against their competition and the government does not have deep pockets. They are expecting them to come in at what they would anybody else. Always get at least 2 quotes. Many of you have heard of this. Not all of you are continuing to practice it. I won't spend a lot of time on this one. Just know that if you are like, oh, this is such a great bid, this is such a great bid, I want to go after it, but there's only I can only get 1 quote for it. If your eagerness for the bid is clouding your judgment and you're like, I'm just going to chance it. Okay, it's up to you. But know that by the time the contract gets awarded, it could be 3 or 4 months. Sub could have come and gone or want to change their pricing or a number of instances that make things change. And then the government's sitting there putting the award on you and now all of a sudden you don't have somebody to fulfill. Okay, I'm talking more like closer to worst case scenario type stuff, but you want to be prepared for it. When you only have one, you're in a world of hurt. Or even worse, the award gets signed, it gets put into action. In some cases, it's a unilateral award and you don't even have to sign it. It's bilateral if you and contracting sign it. It's unilateral if they just say, here you go. And then just like that, it's signed and you don't even get to say anything about it. That's why you do have to be careful with when you're submitting your bid, double checking for errors, things like this. But then also making sure your teaming partner is going to be good to go. Now, there's extending circumstances, sure, of course, but it's your teaming partner at the end of the day too. So say you get a month or 2 on the job and the sub is like, oh, I didn't price for this. Very common. I didn't plan to do all this. If the prime did not do a good job of walking the sub through, say the statement of work, what's actually expected of them. Oh, I didn't price all this. My price is 50% higher. They're going to walk. And then you're going to be left in the middle of a contract with nobody to do the work because you only got 1 quote. And assuming you only got 1 quote because there weren't other quotes to be gotten, if you will. Otherwise, you can just get on the phone and call somebody else. And hopefully you can do that if you have to. Number 26. Maps, Google Maps works great. I don't know why. A lot of folks are saying, don't tell me Maps, don't tell me Google Maps. Give me a GovCon link, give me, Subnet or whatever. There's some websites out there. They're not great. I don't recommend that you even waste your time on them. But some of you still insist that, I don't know, there's some special, I'll tell you what. It's better to work with if you do it right, it can be better to work with a company who doesn't know about government contracting. And so you get to be the one to mold them. It can only be better if you do a good job of molding them, however, right? Because going to these, and there's not many, right? And I'm not throwing them out there, but if you were to go to a place where there's subcontractors for primes, yes, they're educated on it, but they likely can be harder to work with. They're giving a lot of quotes out to a lot of other companies as well. And you're not able to mold or shape them. They're going to come in with a lot of their own stuff because they're already existing in the space. And that can sometimes be harder to work with as a team, as you can probably imagine, versus having somebody who's fresh, new, and you can mold them and you can, kind of set the right expectations. The genie isn't out of the bottle yet, and position them best to kind of work on this project and with you as a teaming partner to, get the job done. So I don't know, I really don't understand why, unless it's a shiny object chasing thing, which I think it is, why people want to find subcontractors and commercial-based businesses off of something that's not like Maps, Google Maps, or, I don't want to say like Angie's List and things like that, but, just these acceptable places to find companies to do work. That is what everybody does in the commercial world. I don't know why we want to just tip it on its head when it gets to the government space. What works, works, period. And I recommend that you stick with what works. Number 27. So when you are starting that discussion with a subcontractor, having that discovery call at the beginning, maybe even just browsing their website, you can check them out to see if they have a cage code. Okay, you can go into SAM. Guys, you can search SAM by things other than bids. So you can search SAM by entities. So when you go to the search entity filter, you can put in the company name. Now it's not like a guaranteed thing, but it's like one box you definitely want to check. And then literally just like putting their company name, and then writing cage and leaving it blank, for example, like throwing out a few different queries to like Google, right? Or whatever you use, DuckDuckGo, Bing. It will bring up whether they have a cage code or not. Company name, government contractor. Like there's a few of these just high level, basic, intuitive things. But start with SAM, searching the entity. It's the technically right way to do it. But if it's LLC and you don't put LLC, for example, it doesn't. And if it doesn't pull up, you're searching by name. There's just, how it is. So you could miss something. So to make sure that you don't miss something, you can also check the bigger search engines as well. And if they have a cage code, you'll know that they're very knowledgeable about government contracting. And then if you don't find anything after doing all that, then you also go to your discovery call with them, the first phone call that you have with the sub when you call them, and you're letting them know there's an opportunity local in their area, and you're a prime government contractor. You work in all 50 states. Type of contracts that you focus on with the government are blank, your umbrella, whatever. And you were looking for a company to team and partner with. This opportunity is local to them, and you look them up online, and it looks like they could be a great fit, and you wanted to know if they're interested in expanding their customer base. And you can talk a little bit more about like what are their pain points. Many commercial-based businesses have their own customers that they just want to fire, right? So imagine they could fire their worst customers, and then they can get on a contract that's like 5 years long, where like it's just not guaranteed, but close to guaranteed, payouts regardless of a recession that happens or whatever. The government's going to keep paying. So that speaks to their pain points, and then you can gauge their interest. And then if they are interested, you can ask and inquire more, like, hey, what is your experience with government contracting? Have you given quotes before? Have you performed work before? And you start to ease into that, knowing you've already done your own research on it, right? And they typically won't hide it, and we'll get into more about that. But that's kind of how that initial conversation can go, and that's kind of the flow. If you're starting with nothing, it's the flow that I do recommend that you start with. And then, number 28, have a primary discovery call. So we're actually right on track with that. The only other thing I was going to add to that with this lesson learned is, what I learned is, like in a relationship, personal relationship, like you can't give your power away. You don't want to give your power away to a sub, once again, because you're desperate, because you're like, oh my God, this is like the best bid. This is a great deal, It matches up very well with my bid, no bid criteria. Maybe it's very stackable. It's a great fit for your book of business, whatever it is. Good, contain that excitement. Don't allow that excitement to overrule. So what I learned is some of you have recruiting experience, and if you don't, it very much is an art. So the first week of my job, my boss wanted to fire me. If it wasn't for the man who ended up being my mentor, who was a senior level recruiter with a lot of experience, started recruiting from the Army, and then went over to a number of companies, and then brought that to the small GovCon business that I worked for. Closing people, I don't even like that term, but I'll just say recruiting as a skill set, it's very much an art. And so picture, a candidate going for a job. You're speaking with somebody and you're the recruiter, and you're really trying to fill the slot, right? Because you get paid a commission on every, seat that you fill or something like that. Just, general terms. You could be anxious, not anxious. You could be very excited, motivated to just to fill the seat. So much so you could overlook if they're actually a great fit, right? You get where I'm going with this. So then they start the job and then they don't work out. Well, you just wasted everybody's time. If you were more diligent up front, you could have moved on to a better candidate. The same thing very much applies here through working with subcontractors. What happens if you kind of oversell the sub and you get that it almost seems like there's a little bit of resistance, a little bit of friction. They're not, they're not sure. But then you're just like, oh yeah, this just go to site visit, or just look at the statement of work. You're kind of forcing it. It's almost like buyer's remorse. Eventually that's going to catch up with you. It's going to creep in if you force it too much. Instead, that candidate who wants that job, they should be selling you on how much they want that job. You have the power. You keep the power. And it's the same with working with subcontractors. If they ain't in it, if they're not interested, if the girl don't want to go on a date with you, you could force it, but it's probably going to be wasting your own time. You'll lean in for the kiss at the end of the night, and she's going to do the dodge, right? Or it's just, I think we should just be friends. Why put yourself through all that? You knew that she wasn't throwing out the vibes, for you at the beginning, but then you forced it, and now you paid for dinner. You get what I'm saying. It just wasn't the best use of everybody's time. Is probably the best way to put it. So the furthest you can go as a prime looking for subs is halfway. They have to meet you halfway. They have to meet you where you're at. If they don't, and you try to force it, you're going to end up paying for that if you force it. Because some people will allow themselves to be, stretched over that line a little bit. But eventually they're going to just spring right back. They will naturally spring back on their own. And you'll be like, what happened? I thought there was this, or we had gotten this far in the deal. Save yourself the heartache and the time and the trouble and move on. And if you can't find any good ones, then the deal's dead. Okay, be okay to kill the deal. Don't be so, in love with it that it's going to allow you to do bad business. One thing you can do, number 29. This is big. It can be big. If you do have a partner who's, a subcontractor that's wanting to play ball, these folks typically are not even typically, they're just not going to be whizzes at reading through solicitations and in some instances lengthy statements of work. They're just not gonna. So you can help them. And what I found to be very helpful is even if you get on the phone for 30 to 60 minutes, okay, say they did a site visit, if there was one, you had that initial discovery call, now you're sending over some of the information. They're not competition, they don't have a cage code. You're sending over information and you're kind of giving them a deadline of when you need to take the next step, whether it's them working on the proposal or whatever, right? If it's overwhelming to them, typically what they seem to do is they sit on it. They just sit on it. And then time goes by and you're like, oh man, I haven't heard from Joe or Jane. What's going on? And then you call them and then they hem and haw and they're like, oh yeah, there was this part, but I wasn't sure about this part. And you're like, oh geez, if you have a question, why didn't you just ask me? They're busy. They ain't gonna do that. They're busy. They have the bread and butter work that they're doing. Although you're putting your job as number one priority, they're not usually putting your job as number one priority. You got to kind of fight for that. So what's really helpful is that instead of losing days or weeks waiting for them to, and then they just, they didn't do anything with that time, spend 30 minutes to an hour and walk them through. Okay? They have a copy, you have a copy, even if it's over the phone. So this part's important. This means this. Does that make sense to you? Next. Okay, so this is what I'm going to need from you. You think you can do that? Any questions? Okay, cool. Do you think you can have it to me by such and such date? Okay, cool. And then you can send a follow-up just with those important bullet points as well. That kind of like greasing the skids can be big. It can make a big difference in terms of saving yourself a bunch of time and heartache. And sometimes it can even cost the bid when so much time was wasted. And then you no longer have that open window to find somebody else because the time was wasted. And it's just like, oh my God, I lost the deal. The deal fell apart. This can, many instances, like prevent a deal from falling apart. Number 30, have the subs attend the site visit and represent your company. So guys, if it's a mandatory site visit, there's going to be a sign-in sheet, right? Like there's always a sign-in sheet anyways. But if it's mandatory, your company, the prime name needs to be on that sheet, or you will not be able to bid. Because the government's saying it's so important that we only want, it's so important that the site visit is attended that we only want to see responses from those who attended it. So if this is out of state, across the country, whatever, it's fine. You can play ball wherever you want, but your name better be on that list. And if it's a sub or even multiple subs, they're all representing your company. It's fine. You educate them. So payment terms. Kind of, around this time, before this point, you want to make sure, before it gets too late, that you understand how they typically accept payments. And I think I talked about this in the first part, but nobody's like getting paid and then doing work. That's not how this works. People do the work and then they get paid. I think I've already touched on this. So you just, the paid when paid concept, the government reimburse invoicing, net 30, initial net 60, that whole process. First, you want to, I got a fly joining me here. First, you want to find out how they typically operate. Is it net 15? Is it net 30? And then when they understand this is a bigger customer, but it's longer contracts, typically larger contracts, right? That's why, in part, and you know what, guys? Every contract is different as well. Every bid is different, every other thing. I've got folks coming to me telling me, hey, Derek, I bill out every single week. Like the core approves invoices every single week. Okay, great. I'm just trying to prepare you for what likely could happen. The situation could definitely be better. If you're invoicing every single week, cash flow is happening 3 or 4 times as much. Great, that's fine too. Making sure though that your partner is kind of good with what to expect of what could happen, ironing that out, payment terms, gets rid of any gotchas that can cause ripples between the relationship. Oh, you didn't tell me that. We don't want that. Number 32, you want to set their deadlines ahead of yours. So at least put them a few days ahead of schedule. If the bid's due April 25th, theirs is due April 22nd. Like you need to give yourself time to review it. If they mess something up, and it depends. Some instances, maybe like more time than that, maybe a week. Like it depends. It very much depends on the size of the contract, right? For the type of contracts that you guys are going after, under $1 million, up to $1 million, up to a couple million, it really just kind of depends. And it also depends, like, have you seen a first draft from them? Lots of factors. You get the point. Use your own expertise. Don't come to me and say, Derek, you said only a couple days and it wasn't enough time. You use your own intelligence. You get what I'm saying. Don't just make them do the morning of the bid is due, because guys, we're not just taking what the sub gives us and submitting it to the government. You know how many times I've had people like clarify that with me? It has to be on your letterhead. It's got to be like you. That's so scary to think. It's so scary to think that some of you are just going to take what the sub gives you and just give it to the government. You have to review it. You're going to have to add your own company information to it. You should be using a cover letter. You should be using your own cover page. The proposal is likely going to have at least some sort of tripwires or formatting that you're going to have to probably change because the sub's probably not going to do that. Like there's just so much that you have yet to do, especially, and even down to like government forms, whether there's amendments, there's pricing Excel worksheets, putting together reps and certs. You got to separate this stuff into volumes, whether it's all in one document or they want it specifically in separate different documents. And then all your table of contents are going to have to, there's absolutely no way the sub is doing that. Okay, you're managing the proposal writing, and you're also leaning into the areas that the sub is not. Okay, you're responsible for a lot here. So to just take what the sub gives and gives to the government, like Jesus, we're not doing that. I forgot even what this lesson was, but the deadlines. So definitely setting them ahead of schedule for reasons we just discussed. Number 33, be aware of red flags and warning signs. Big, very important. For example, a sub that says that they've kind of something leading to the point of they've been burned in the past. They're kind of coming off an attitude. Oh yeah, I've done one of those government contracts before. My God, I've heard it so much too. You probably don't even want to work with them. And if they're the only ones that's willing to bid it, you probably just want to no bid it. There's these guys out there. I haven't really had it with girls too much. So literally guys, they're just so, and to put myself in their shoes, somewhat rightly so, there's a lot of primes out there that are doing bad business. Send sub out to a site visit, never hear from them again, right? Or they get a number from the sub does all this work, and then they don't even give them closure that they ended up not choosing them, or picking their number or whatever. And they just, a lot of subs are tired of having their time wasted. So if you have to gauge, if there's an opportunity for you to say, I'll be different, give me a chance, then maybe. But if they are just so not even, it's not your job to save them, and they will be problems for you, because they're going to take their anger out on you. Don't give them that chance. Just pass. Just don't work. Just don't work with them if it's that bad. And the other red flag that I'll give you, warning sign, is subcontractors who they say all the right things, and you're like, oh my God, I got this. We're gonna win this. This is a slam dunk, and you're flying high. Beware. Beware. If it's too good to be true, beware. If their mouth is moving a lot like this, but then if they're not showing up, they're missing their deadlines, they didn't do the site visit, or they didn't have anything meaningful to come away with it, and you're like, really? You don't even have one question, where it's just almost too easy, too good to be true, there's too much space, but then they're just all thumbs up and smiles. Something's fishy there. Something's going on. And these people are typically ones that they are afraid of confrontation. They're afraid of, I don't want to say afraid of saying no, but maybe not no to you, but they're afraid of saying no to work. So they'll take too much on with well intentions, which is why they're doing this with a smile on their face. But then when it comes down to the nitty gritty, they're just yeah, I'm sorry, and they're gonna be super nice about it. I'm just not able to. I ran out of time, or I couldn't get it, or I had this other last minute thing that's due. And then they leave you high and dry, and they do it with a smile on their face. So you didn't suspect it. They weren't all angry and burnt. They were quite the opposite. They were quite delightful. Guy was a nice guy. But you're not going to be feeling like he's a nice guy after, you kind of feel like you were led on a little bit. So if there's, writing on the wall that their behavior is not matching what they're saying, I wouldn't go too far in that. At some point, you're going to have to have a conversation with him, or just let it go. There's a really nice blue jay outside my windows here. So So then our last one for our subs. Okay, last one for part 2, subcontractors. Number 34. Set reasonable expectations for subs waiting for the contract. So most of these, some of these are tips, right? There's 100 of these, but many of them are lessons learned either from myself or through working with clients. I've seen it, and I'm guilty of this. So when you go through the process, this actually flowed together really nice in terms of the ordering for the subs. I'm really happy with how that turned out. Because now we're kind of like closer to a final stage. Now we've submitted the bid. Obviously things worked out with at least 2 subs, right? And you have a sub in mind. You submitted the information with your proposal, the one that you want to work with. They're like, let's go. Like, have you experienced this? Have you experienced it where like you've submitted the offer, then like 3 days later they start calling you? Have you heard anything yet? Have you heard anything yet? Some of you may know it may take like up to 2 months, for most of the work we go after. For some contracts, it can take a year, For a lot of these, it's like 1 to 2 months, in the range that we talk about here on the channel for the award. And it could be contracting's like on vacation, like they're just not there. Or if it's a bigger level of effort, the response, it's also going to be a bigger level of effort to review responses, right? Or if there's many responses versus fewer responses, these factors all influence, what is the time of year? Like, does the money need to be spent, before September 30th? All these different angles, they all affect the timeliness of the award. Now you can follow up with the contracting and say, hey, is there an estimated award date? We just want to make sure the contract hasn't been awarded yet, But the sub is going to be like raring to go. And if they're on that level of expectation, after a couple of weeks of that, they're going to start to lose hope. They're going to like think that we didn't get it. Worst case, they're going to start thinking that you're just jerking them around. Their loyalty to you, the vibe of that tends to like change a little bit on the phone call. It's only been 2 weeks. So setting a reasonable expectation for them, it's quite possible, it'll be great, and it could happen, that over the next couple of weeks, this is awarded, or this month, but it might be a couple months, Government's big, it moves slow. Bigger things move slower, typically. So managing their expectations, they're not going to be, because they're going to be like, oh, this is normal. This is supposed to happen if we're on week 6 and it hasn't awarded. But those who are thinking like, okay, I did all this. I hurried up. He gave me the schedule. I did everything he wanted to do. And now it's been a week and we didn't win the contract yet. We want to manage the subcontractors' expectations. It's going to keep them warm as being a good teaming partner with you, continuing through the process. So making sure they understand the process as well as you understand it in some instances is going to keep them. And I see this a lot. I see it a lot. Derek, what do I say? Contracting saying it hasn't been awarded yet. I've already called them twice, 2 weeks in a row. And my sub's like acting like they're going to go take on other jobs and they won't be able to do this. Okay, well, the best thing you can do, you can't control anybody, but the best thing you can do is manage your expectations from the get-go. So we'll wrap up part 2 here, and I'll see you in the next one.